and your Limerick representatives about that. But coming in from Clare, we were moving nice and fast. But the coming in at Lunkard Bridge. Look, we're here to talk about United Ireland, and let's get straight down to it, because this is a very important series of talks. But there's a very sad irony tonight as we speak about uniting Ireland and having a full island country once more, that we are at the same time being saturated with a news feed come from Ukraine, where our country is being denied its independence, where you have big money and big tanks rolling over the border, seizing freedom from those people. They're being invaded tonight. In the early 90s, I had the honour of studying for a year in Olomouc in Czech Republic. It was a time when they were themselves getting ready to head into the European Union. The countries of Eastern and Central Europe in that time, and still is the case, were very much looking westwards to the European Union, westwards towards NATO. They certainly were turning their backs on the bad old days of Soviet Union rule. My heart goes out to the people of Ukraine. I think the collective limp response from the world over the last few months has emboldened the bully in the schoolyard that is Putin. I think that's largely why we find ourselves where we are today. I've loved history all the way up since childhood, and I went on and studied it in college in UL. So Dr. Ryan O'Donnell was someone I'd have sat in his lecture halls. History and politics and economics was what I studied, and I ended up being a primary school teacher after that. I blog about history and I write about history, and I think history is very importantly linked to everything we're going to talk about tonight, because history is our pathway to where we got to today. I think sometimes as we talk about United Ireland, as we try to sanitise ourselves as a nation and prepare for reconciliation and prepare to reach out within Europe, and we talk about Brexit and we talk about stretching out arms to Britain, we often lose the run of ourselves as well. It was utterly daft to consider commemorating the Royal Irish Constabulary, a force whose only presence here was to subjugate the will of the Irish people for independent rule. It was equally daft a few months ago for a councillor in this city to suggest that you take an angle grinder to those beautiful old post boxes that are a throwback to that history as well. Let's embrace history, warts and all. I really do believe that, Vincent. The RIC, I taught...
Even in speaking for only 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'd move on.
Because you're well over it now. But go take another minute.
Yeah, but we embrace history, warts and all, and that's the only way politically we can move forward as a full island, embracing both traditions and indeed newcomers to our country as well. My family, like many here in the room, would have had their own War of Independence tradition. My wife's grandfather was a Free Stater with Collins in West Cork. I believed in United Ireland for a long time that involved tricolours or on the Vian, a very much nationalist, resurgent Ireland. And I think probably as we come closer, and I do believe we're coming closer to United Ireland, it probably won't be the United Ireland I envisage and many of you envisaged for many years. The fact is that 1.3 million people on this island, 1.3 million have been born since the Good Friday Agreement. They do look at nationalism, they look at unionism, but they look at Irish life and the life that they lead through many different lenses. Climate change, marriage equality. They will also, when it comes to time of United Ireland, it won't just be about what flag flies over the buildings or what colour the postbox is. They will look at things like NHS, HSE, judicial system, penal system, taxation system. Block grants come from Europe. They will look at the farming system, cap reform. All of these other metrics are crucially important as we go forward. We really need to look at United Ireland through an economic lens and all those other lenses of inclusion as well. The Government Shared Island Initiative is...
Okay, that's it. That's it.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it was very interesting hearing about your...
I was told it was a longer...
All right, go on. Would you like to speak next?
I haven't even...
Yeah,
come here.
I'm time talking about yourself, but...
No,
I can finish it for you, Carl.
Well, you'd have to keep the same time and everyone else, Vincent.
Yeah, it's 5 minutes then.
They should organise it telling us we have the same time then.
Good evening, everyone, and it's an honour to be here talking to you and I suppose adding my voice to the topic of a united Ireland. I arrived in Ireland 20 years ago, and January 2022 would make me 20 years living in Ireland. My children are here with me. I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all born here. My daughter has warned me never to declare her age anymore, so I won't do that. And I suppose, moving to a foreign country, I had never been to Ireland up until I moved down here. So I had to adapt, I had to learn the Irish culture, I had to integrate, and I took it upon myself to, get included in the community, and just for the sake of my own, I suppose, my own future, my own progress, and my own prosperity, and for that of my children, so that I can assist them to adapt to the culture in Ireland. I have the best of the Nigerian culture and the Irish culture, and it is so important for all voices to come together, because throughout my period of integrating and nurturing my children and getting a job and working in the private sector, getting into the public sector, and then becoming a public rep. I am currently the Lord Mayor of Longford Municipal District and Longford County Council, and in all that time, it has been a tale of both challenges and a tale of triumphs. And right now, as a public rep, I am trying to feed into policies and feed into legislation so that they are more inclusive, so that my children, when they're in the labor market, they don't have the same barriers I experience. Barriers like companies looking for people that feed into their organizational culture, and straight away, if it's an Irish organization, it's going to be people are going to be marginalized, people are going to be disenfranchised, and there's 14% of the Irish population currently that's from a migrant background, and so if we don't get these voices in and articulate our own concerns and our own desires for a modern Ireland, because like I said, I'm here 20 years, I'm working 18 of those 20 years, so I think I've earned the right to add my voice to this conversation. So it's very important for me to be able to see a new Ireland, to see the future and see where I can fit in that future. And that's the importance of having these joint conversations. I give you a few stories of some experiences I became privy to. We had meetings on 2 occasions with migrant groups from the Northern Ireland. And at that meeting, we learned that in those migrant groups, there were a few people who didn't have citizenship. They didn't have British citizenship. They didn't have Irish citizenship. And as a result, they couldn't travel with the party to the Republic. Imagine people who have worked tirelessly to come up with ideas to work on projects, only to discover that at a particular stage gate, they're unable to participate, and that is just a mild example. I was told of people that couldn't get access to healthcare because of they didn't have citizenship, because they didn't have stamp 4, and it's terrible. So it's very important. I just wanted to share my experience. I didn't want to. I chose not to write a speech. I just wanted to speak from the heart, just to articulate how important it is for migrant voices to be included as we discuss and as we frame a united Ireland going forward. Thank you very much.
Orema has joined Fianna Fáil, and that's why she spoke so long. Rowan.
I was thinking I did so well, Vincent.
Very encouraging to see this turnout, particularly in that weather. And obviously the fact that it's being recorded and broadcast is helpful in amplifying the events such as this. In 2 to 3 or 4 minutes, thereabouts, not very much I can say, but I'll just raise a few points in brief. I think that the pathway in the midterm towards reuniting our country, and people should remember, in my opinion, that we were united and we were disunited by the acts of a foreign government, is going to be quite difficult. It's a challenge, but nonetheless, many of the underlying forces of change are positive and going in the right direction. The results of the 2021 census are due to be released in the course of this summer, unless they're delayed for the north of Ireland, as they had been in the past, because the news is quite frightening for unionism. Now, unionism is not a monolithic bloc, as we know, but basically speaking, those who support the British analysis in the Irish question are very far removed from the bulk of the population who believe otherwise, that we should determine our own destiny as an island, as a single people, even if it has increasingly diverse elements within that. The 2011 census, just for 1 second, showed that only 48% of the population in the north identified as having Protestant heritage. And roughly speaking, sadly, that would tend to equate with unionism. Now, there would be those born into the Catholic faith who would be de facto unionists and cannot be relied upon to vote the right way when push comes to shove. But the numbers game is catastrophically against those who wish to see the British connection maintained. It won't just be a cold house. It doesn't have to be a cold house. I want it to be a warm house, but it needs to be our house, if just to paraphrase a famous remark by David Trimble in the past. It's interesting to see Doug Beattie of the official unionists speaking against Jonathan. Good God, I'm losing my train of thought completely here. Speaking against the DUP leader, Jeffrey Donaldson. He accused the DUP of being, quote, divisive. Now, we don't normally see that type of public fissure within the increasingly one-voice unionism that came into being in the aftermath of the Good Friday Agreement. But in this time of flux, people who did believe in supremacy, some of whom were also individually sectarian, who presided over a regime that was systematically discriminatory against a very large element within their polity, are going to have to learn with living in a situation where they're the minority. Now, unionism always was the minority situation across the island. For it to become a minority in a self-created zone is an existential crisis for them. And I think we have to be mindful in how we approach them, how we encourage them to dialogue, to articulate what they might want to see us becoming as a whole in the future, that they're in a state of crisis. They could do with a charismatic intellectual leadership. They could do it even with the hardcore pragmatism of a Paisleyite or someone like that. But we have to bear in mind that to integrate these people, we'll need the support of London, and we'll need the support of people who elect increasingly a smaller and smaller proportion of the MLAs that may meet again in Stormont or may not. So I'll just finish on the note by saying I support the idea put forward by Ireland's Future and indeed by Sinn Féin of having some form of citizens' body or citizens' assembly. I think organisations such as this and occasions such as this are steps in the right direction. I would love to see the moderate face of unionism being represented. They accuse people like me of being some form of cultural nationalist or whatever. I don't like people putting labels on me. I won't put them on them, but I'd like to talk about it. And if they're serious in debating, and if they want to have a major say in their future, they need to start talking because it's going to happen.
Thanks very much. I'm, for those who don't know me, I'm Maurice Quinlan TV for Limerick City. First elected in 2016, re-elected in 2020. Just want to thank everybody who organised this. It's great to be here. And as Vincent has put a time limit on what we can say, I'm not going to use the speech, much of it I was going to use. I just want to very much welcome everybody who's turned up. I think it's a really good initiative. There's a number of these have taken place across the state. I think this is the first one in person. I'm open to correction on that. But, you know, as the restrictions lift, I'm sure there'll be more. There's plans for a massive rally in October of this, to come into people. We were hoping for, well, Ireland's Future, hoping with that 10,000 people plus will turn up to that. I want to just start very briefly and send my thoughts and deep thoughts to the people of Ukraine and to the Russian people who I believe the bulk of them don't want to be involved in any war with their neighbours. So they're very much in my thoughts, and it's a very difficult situation the world and Europe has found itself in today. Preparing for New Ireland, I think, is vitally important. I, of course, look forward to New Ireland, but those in the island there'll be others in the island who look forward to New Ireland, and they'll possibly have some fear or trepidation, and we need to take that into account in everything we say and everything we do. We need to be persuaders for people who want to come to New Ireland. I desire a New Ireland, but it cannot be just a 26+6 formula. We need a genuinely New Ireland that embraces all its citizens and their dreams. A united Ireland, in my opinion, is useless if it's a society that unless it respects all traditions, including those born or brought to this island, and many who are from or have a generational link to other parts of the globe. When times were particularly hard on this island, generations of Irish people were separated from family and friends and often embarked on what were very difficult, dangerous trips across seas, away to far and unfamiliar and in sometimes hostile lands. It's often something I think about when I speak to asylum seekers and those who face barriers obtaining citizenship or residence status here in this country. However, now I believe is a really exciting time for our nation. Our constitutional future has been discussed in a way that hasn't been previously, and holding this debate, for instance, in Limerick City tonight is clear evidence of that. Deciding on a new Ireland and how we shape it is something that we can all share in, but it's not solely for people in my own party, Sinn Féin, to do that. We need everybody to get involved in that, and we need everyone who supports the idea of United Ireland needs to become a persuader for that. anybody who assumes that a referendum will automatically be won in the southern state, even for instance, needs to cop themselves on and realise we have to persuade people of the benefits for United Ireland. There's 3 things I'd like to mention. As I said, my speech is gone because, for instance, it's cut over time. But the first thing I think is we need a National Citizens Assembly to discuss the issues that will be pertinent in the New Ireland. We need to set a date for holding the referendum on Irish unity, and we need to discuss public services, how they don't work and how they can work, and then how an enhanced economy, I believe, we could deliver in the United Ireland. So the Irish government, I believe, has a duty and a constitutional obligation to prepare for unity. We have seen the Brexit referendum and its aftermath, just how damaging a major change can be without forward planning. We cannot make that same mistake here. The convening of a National Citizens Assembly with governmental support and resources will allow for political, civil and cultural entities to become involved in the process. It would put citizens at the heart of shaping the New Ireland. Any such assembly must have a participation from those residing in the north, the south and our diaspora. It must be inclusive of perspectives from ethnic and sexual minorities, groupings, and of course our brothers and sisters in the unionist community. The government here should prepare for a unity referendum, and the first stop is holding the National Citizens Assembly. It's almost 24 years since the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, and it was a historic day for Ireland. It is an agreement that both Britain and the Irish governments are guarantees of, and have a duty to ensure that all aspects of the agreement are implemented. The British government have not always honoured their commitments, and have been critical of our government in terms of living up to their responsibilities. But in all, the agreement has been overwhelmingly popular for our whole nation. The provision of a unity referendum is an important element of the agreement, and it cannot be ignored. Make no mistake, the Good Friday Agreement did not settle the constitutional question, but has created the mechanism through which the constitutional question can be settled. There is a momentum for a unity referendum to be called, and I'm disappointed with the current government, and I would urge them to take the lead in working with the British government to set a date for such a referendum. And I just want to briefly talk, because I think my time is probably nearly up, about public services.
Well up.
Okay, I'll finish up there by saying, hopefully there'll be a lot of questions there. I wanted to talk about a new economy and public services, and then hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that with questions from the audience. So thank you very much.
This is Sandrine, who's originally from Rwanda, then from Kenya, then England, and then then Ireland.
Yeah. So hi everyone. So for those who don't know me, my name is Sandrine, and I'm a third-year PhD student in UL. So I'm not a politician. So I'm just coming from an academic and a young person who's trying to make a change in Ireland. So when I think about the future of Ireland, is the whole concept of diminishing and changing the meaning of Irishness. So I say this as a person I've been in Ireland since 2006. My little brothers are born in Ireland. But yet, whenever I talk that, I'm from Carlow, it's always, but where are you actually from? So again, that's something that needs to change, because we have to understand how Irishness is no longer something that's fixed. So like in the past, like I did English and history, and through history, like I've done a lot of essays and discussions where, again, it talks about the term of Irishness, and Irishness is always described as something that is white, heterosexual, and Catholic. And again, that leaves out a lot of different people. So for even me existing being Rwandese Irish, that changes that, and that's the kind of future that I would want in Ireland. Another element of it is creating spaces where minority voices are central to that. Like too often within like Irish discourses, minority voices, like the different issues that we go through, whether or not be racism, different barriers to education and class, anything like that, it's spoken about, but we're not the ones speaking. So like through my work that I do, like through documentary and literary magazine, I centralize these voices and pass the mic to different communities in order to talk about that. And I think that even when we're talking about the concept of race in Ireland, and again, like with that nationality element of it, too often we do leave out important voices like traveller community. So again, that's something that I would hope that in the future, that when we are thinking about Irishness, and again, the sense of inclusivity and diversity, that we don't leave out those voices, because in order for a united Ireland, again, it has to be something that we all feel proud of, and again, it moves away from viewing Irishness as just one thing. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Does anybody from the floor wish to contribute or ask a question? Yeah.
Great. I think it would be wonderful if we come to these events in future and we see maybe tradesmen and builders and unemployed people, and people whose family have been ravaged, especially here in Limerick, by drugs and things like that. So I think we won't see any really change in Ireland's future until we have an actual representative. And it's all very well having academics, and thank you to everybody who spoke, and your contribution is very welcome. And also thanks very much to people who go out there and represent us and our public representatives. But I do think the issues that are discussed are the same old things, the same old time and time again. And I do think that we really, 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 really need to see change. And I would say one more thing, if you don't mind listening to me. I think our education system is no longer, especially at second level, fit for purpose. And I think one of the ways that we could actually go about changing Ireland is we could look at the education system, offer real choice. Does somebody want a career in the military, a proper military? We saw when the submarines came up there to Cork that we didn't have a navy that would go out there, not that they'd have much chance, I'd say, if Russia decided to do something. I think another thing we should look at is at transition year or third year that young people are offered trades. All this thing about everyone has to go to college, everyone has to be an academic, and it hasn't served us well. There's huge flaws in it, and before we go back to, over our history and talking about all of these issues, we need a real change. And I believe it does start with the education system and with actually having representatives of all walks of life at all of these talks. Thanks very much for listening to me.
Is anybody here sceptical about the idea of a united Ireland or opposed?
Well, you'd have to be sceptical about it until you see that there's real change in the Ireland we're living in at the moment.
But apart from that one person, anybody sceptical or opposed? How can we talk about, how can we have a genuine discussion about a united Ireland unless we involve people of different views and opposing views? I don't know. Anybody else want to talk? Yeah.
Shane Fallon, I've travelled up from Cork there, the Sinn Féin member in Cork. Fair play to Vincent, you made a great point. We should have more people around this table, unionist side and all, and they're going to be very important part of the conversation. Can I just say the last girl there, that's the United Ireland I want to live in. An inclusive, equality-based United Ireland is definitely what we want. The point I have though is for the government members here tonight, and I think you brought it up when you started about the conflict in Ukraine.
I don't think I even got started.
Now, like, whether it is a 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, God forbid 1 year or longer conflict, right? We know that tonight all the members, the presidency, all the top men in the EU are sitting around the table tonight, and the Eastern blocs are in the horrors. They want more support. They want a stronger EU to come around them, support them, and to protect them from this. Now, whenever this conflict is finished, I wonder, can our government go to the EU, and while they're getting the support to make sure that their democratic rights are respected and they're members of the EU, could we not look for the same support here in bringing about United Ireland from the EU through promise of funding, reunification funds, whatever kind of support we can have just to run the campaign? And like if we're sitting at that table in a year's time or a month's time or whenever this conflict is finished, there will be a conversation to have about solidifying the Eastern Bloc. Let's do a bit on the Western Bloc as well. Do you know, I think that'll be something to think about.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak at this stage?
Can I just say one other thing? I suppose of all the days of the year to be talking about a united Ireland, we've seen where rabid nationalism can get people. So I suppose, that is the elephant in the room. We have to be careful as well. I mean, as you say, is it all the people here looking at things from the exact same viewpoint or not? So what is nationalism? Why is it important? And what are the dangers when we pursue it?
Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah. So just to follow up on that, how I think one of the big questions is how do you engage with unionism that doesn't want to be part of the conversation? Now that's not all of them. I know there's people involved with Ireland's future, but certainly political unionism definitely doesn't want to, and there are things within the Good Friday Agreement that are beyond our control. So obviously, the Irish government have acted on, the Irish citizen provisions in the Good Friday Agreement. That everyone in the north has the right to be Irish, British, or both. But in the event of a united Ireland, who grants, Britain can only grant British citizenship. That's not something that's under our control. So how do we protect the rights of unionism, people who consider themselves British, to actually maintain that? If we've seen the British government, with its Nationality and Borders Bill, it can strip away citizenship at the drop of a hat. So once unity happens, which I believe it will, what's to stop them? We can't grant British citizenship to unionists in the north, and they could just strip that away from them. So how do we protect, their identity from a British government that I think we all know, and I think unionism is realising we cannot trust?
Okay, anybody else? All right, I'll ask a few questions then. Are you in favour, Carl? Are you in favour of United Ireland if a majority in Northern Ireland, 50% plus one vote, with the unionist community almost en masse voting against it? Are you still in favour of United Ireland?
I am, but you have to have the border poll at the right time. There's been a lot of talk, good debate, and just on Shane's point, it's some very good debate. People have been on national television saying it must be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I think when we get into prescribing timeframes, we're into trouble. The risk, what I would really worry about, I'm as passionate about United Ireland as everyone here, and I think everyone in the room. We don't have someone opposing it, but there's been two massive polls in the UK in the last few years. The Scottish independence poll, the Brexit poll, both went ways I think nobody expected. I don't want a border poll to go the opposite way to how we all want it. It's important to get it right. When it comes right, I believe it will come right. When it does come right, of course, we will be leaning back on Europe. But already there's a lot of European...
Any chance you'd answer the question?
I answered it.
But that you're in favour of United Ireland if there's just one vote, if 20% vote for it plus one, 50% vote for it plus one, with a mass of unionists opposed to it, you're still in favour of United Ireland?
Politics can be brutal in terms of electoral and referendum processes, and if it come down to that is a majority. That's what's elected governments, that's what elected presidents, that's what it is.
Do you want a United Ireland where such a huge number of people don't want to be part of it?
But if I can expand, that I was up there and I couldn't even get 10 sentences out. When we get to United Ireland, it probably would be so different to how all of us want it. It will probably need to be federal in the sense of maybe a division by provinces or clusters of counties, something like they have in Germany, where you will be able to accommodate for... Not all of Ulster has a unionist outlook either. There's large parts of Derry and all that very much would agree with us here in the room. But certainly you need to carve up the country a little bit into new political entities, constituencies, or the Bundeslands they call them in Germany, federal states, and each state having its own with a national government then formed out of it. I think that's the only way going forwards, that a unionist community can rightly feel that they haven't a diluted voice in Dublin, that they actually have in their federal part of Ireland a strong say that feeds into the national governance.
So you're in favour of United Ireland, even if just...
Through the mechanisms of the Good Friday Agreement. And we know what that is, to have a border poll.
And if you don't mind, can I formulate my own question?
I won't interrupt you at all.
That 50% of the people vote for it, and just a bare 50% vote for it. The mass of unionists are opposed to it, and a significant minority of unionists are prepared to resort to violence to stop it. You're still in favour of United Ireland?
Majorities work both ways. I'm in favour of United Ireland. When we get a majority border poll vote, we move on. And it's the structures that will keep peace and bring economic prosperity. They're more important, Vince.
Right. How about you? Are you in favour of United Ireland if there's just a 50% vote in favour of it and the massive unionists are opposed?
That scenario you described, Vincent, is what we experienced at Brexit. The percentages were very similar as well, and Brexit happened. So there will be work to do. Hopefully we'll get a lot more in favour, but the majority, whatever the terms of the majority is. Yes, absolutely, yes.
Ron, how about you?
Yes, I am in favour, even under those unideal terms you outlined there, because that was the deal that was struck, and that was the deal that ended the war, that would still be going on now if it wasn't for the deal. Unionists, I think, are probably quietly having conversations how they will respond in various ways. The smart element amongst them, and they're there, certainly must realise is a golden opportunity for them to redefine themselves in perpetuity. They may be able to acquire enormous constitutional influence out of all proportion to their demographic strength on the island as a whole. So I think they stand to gain a great deal if they play their hand carefully.
Nice.
Yeah, well, look, the referendum has to be fought firstly, obviously, and I would imagine that we will have a positive referendum. I would imagine it's up to all of us in this room and others to persuade people to vote. But if it was vote and we won it by one vote, then obviously I wouldn't be abandoning the people in the north who actually voted to come and join us. You know, partition has been a disaster for this country. We all know that. But the majority of it's one. It is a majority, so you can't say you won't drag, and we don't want to do that. We don't want to drag people into a different state that they want to come into, but we have to be realistic and say there is going to be a border poll. I genuinely believe that Brexit has changed things to a certain extent. There is business people are way ahead of us already. You know, Ireland is united economically for a certain trade. If you see the trade up and down between the both states, if you talk to people, if you do cross-border surgeries, medicines, stuff like that. If we have a referendum, if we have a positive referendum, I believe we will win it. And I don't want to be in a situation where we're dragging the entirety.
Do you think we'd win it down here? Do you think the majority of people would want?
But down here is the key to winning it down here is to sell the benefits of what a United Ireland would be. We have to sell it how. You know, there's this narrative there, we can't afford the North. I believe we can't not afford the North. You know, there's studies there, there's lots and more studies coming on. That's why I would ask and appeal for the government to set up a citizens' assembly on this. So these questions and these issues can be teased out. We need to address the issues. And the lady over there made very, very valid points, like why would you want to come into a health service that we have? Why would you want to be, we're sitting here in Limerick at the moment, if you have a child waiting to see a child psychologist waiting for over a year, if you're unfortunately, one of the people that are probably there today in our hospital, 1,200 people already in February have been on a trolley in University Hospital Limerick. Why would you want to come into a situation like that? And as the lady mentioned as well, we have a massive drugs problem which hasn't been addressed. So we need to, I called for this in the Dáil yesterday, we need to have a citizens' assembly on the issue of drugs and how we deal with drugs and the way they've affected communities, families and destroyed them. So, but I think, for instance, the referendum has to be positive and we have to go into this. We don't want to tell people what to do. We want to go out and give them the reason why they're better off. And Rowan said it well there. You have a percentage of 20% of people probably who permanently, with the nature of the government we have, would probably be in government always.
How about you? Would you advise us to go ahead with the United Ireland even if close to 50% of the people in Northern Ireland were against it? Unionists were against it.
I would agree with what everyone has said because, like, again, like with what you were saying in regards to Brexit, even though people were voted for it, again, like the majority were still opposed to that. So, and like, again, it's just to do with democracy. Like, I wouldn't really be into politics, but I definitely agree, like, if you educate people about it and it's like that sense of benefit. And again, if we are already redefining what Irishness and everything like that means, then we'll have to do that. So again, everyone's future will probably be different and will be affected in that regard.
Politics here was dominated by the issue of partition for years and years, dominated by nationalism, and you could hardly get people to talk about any other issue for a long time. Why does the United Ireland matter? If people of Northern Ireland, if you have a decent society in Northern Ireland, and by the way, if you had an integrated society in Northern Ireland, and you had a happy, decent society down here, what does it matter whether we're separate? Why does it matter?
It matters historically and it matters currently, and I'll answer both if you don't mind. So I just looked up some statistics the other day. I studied my family tree. 1901 census, there was an elderly lady living in our family homestead whose first language is Irish. We now only have Irish being spoken in the far peninsulas of Connacht and down in the Dingle Peninsula. For the last century, we have seen that partition has been the most divisive. It's been corrupted. It's been horrendous to our island. It's stymied economic growth. It has separated people. No island should be split by that. I think the United Ireland that and Morris and others have said it, and Ruan has said it in the Rainbow. It's going to involve bringing people who don't agree with us together. It has to make economic sense. It has to make sense in, NHS, HSE, all of those other metrics. A lot of friends I have actually, surprisingly, over a bar chat some months ago said, when we were allowed to have drinks, they said they may not vote for United Ireland because it's not all about nationalism and unionism, it's about all those other things that matter to them. A lot of people drive out of their drive in the morning, their motivation is to earn money, pay a mortgage and come home again. So it has to make sense to them as well. It's not all about identity.
But I don't understand. The question was, what's so great about United Ireland if the two parts of Ireland were functional and people were happy about it and there was significant equality? Why would we? What does it matter?
Every country has a right to self-determination and to not be invaded, like what's happening tonight in Ukraine. And every country, no matter how long that pathway to unification takes, every country has that full right.
You mean, assume you mean nation, do you? Do you mean nation, do you?
Yes, every nation has we have the right to unite an island that for centuries was divided, and the pathway to that's taken longer to be planned. But
where did this right come from? Who thought up that right?
Self-determination is an indisputable right. I think the whole world has embraced for the last 100 years.
What do you think, that if Northern Ireland were a functioning society and there was integration in Northern Ireland between the two communities, which there certainly is not now, what would it matter if Ireland remained two separate entities?
Well, I think the fact that this conversation has been had means that there is the will, there is the interest in the both North and South uniting, because obviously, like it was articulated, it was one nation before it was split, before the 6 counties were essentially taken away from us and retained by the British.
Who took them away?
It was retained by the British, the 6 nations. And,
why do you think they did it?
Well, for the reasons which I learned when I came into Ireland. However, I have travelled down from Longford to Monaghan in one of my previous careers, and in my journey from Longford to Monaghan, I passed the Northern Ireland towns 3 times, because I knew from my sat-nav it changed from kilometres to miles and back again. And there are communities at the border counties who actually travel across to go to school, and those lives are affected. And even the Good Friday Agreement it wasn't as beneficial as that arrangement is. It does not benefit. There are people excluded from migrant communities. So there's every reason to have this conversation. There's every reason to try and achieve a united Ireland for the benefit of people both North and South. I think there's the will there. There's economic benefits. We can share best practices between the North and the Republic and find a happy medium, a happy way to coexist. The protocol and the border conversation and invoking Article 16 will certainly be a moot point if we achieve a united Ireland.
Ron, why does it matter?
Well, I do think it is important to resolve one of the most dangerous fault lines that exists in our society today. We tend to forget that just because it's okay now and the North is far from normal and the border counties are far from satisfied with still being in the interface of 2 different zones, it may not always be like that. And things that can, over a long period of time, answer these questions would be desirable. The only reason the British military, only real reason the British military are not currently on their so-called border, which they put on our map, is that the Ministry of Defence, the British government, don't want them there. They could be sent in tomorrow. Now, I think it's very unlikely to happen.
I'm sorry, say it again.
The British military are not deployed in the North, but they could be deployed tomorrow if there was a political will in London. Now, we need to move to a situation that would not simply unlikely, but impossible. We have 2 telecommunication zones, 2 currencies,
and why do you think
2 hospital systems.
The British Army became involved in 1969, for instance?
Because they were unwilling to regulate the so-called internal affairs of Stormont, to treat the nationalist community with tolerable decency. And when there was resistance to that, they played the orange card, and unfortunately that led to a generational war.
They came to because things had got completely out of control, and there was danger that other Catholic areas would be attacked, and many Catholics killed.
Respectfully, I don't believe that for a second. I believe they went to shore up the 6-county state. Appeals could have been made to the United Nations. There are other forums that could have been involved if it was peacekeeping was genuinely considered.
Morris.
Look, I said it earlier, partition has been a disaster for this country.
In what way?
I'll tell you what, in what way now. My grandmother grew up in United Ireland. Her daughter, who is my mother, is in this room, and it's my sincere wish that she would see a United Ireland as well. I believe it's been economically ruined. We had a sectarian orange state, whether we like to say it or not, in the north, and that's where the conflict came from. We have, you talk about a 50+1 vote on a referendum. You know, the people, everybody's equal in this country, and everybody's going to be equal in the New Ireland. So Catholics, Protestants, and nationalists or nationalists and unionists, whatever you want to call them, they'll all be equal on the poll. But I genuinely do believe, you know, you have two education systems, you have two currencies, you have two different health services. Putting those together, and the benefits of a united Ireland, which has been shown in a huge number of reports recently, and there's reports being commissioned, and that's why I would appeal for Citizens' Assembly so these issues can be teased out. But I genuinely believe that bringing people together, personally, bringing people together would be good for us anyway, but economically it would be good for us as well. I believe the historical wrong that was done, and don't forget, Vincent, the Irish people voted in 1918 for a united Ireland. That was broken up by the British. We had partition, as I said, was the outcome of that. It's been a setup of a narrow Catholic state in the south. I grew up in the 80s with utter
But
poverty.
why did we have partition? Do you remember why we had partition?
We had partition because the IRA at the time in the War of Independence at the time we came up with a treaty and were threatened by Lloyd George and his associates that they would unleash terrible and immediate war.
No, that's nothing to do with it. No. Partition was not an issue at that time. The issue of partition was to be determined by a boundary commission.
Yeah, but I disagree with you there because I think a lot of people didn't fall for that bit. You know, some people who were voting on the treaty or who were opposed to the treaty were opposed to the treaty for a number of reasons, but one of those was partition. And it wasn't a case of they would say, oh, there's going to be boundary. No, some people didn't believe the boundary thing would have been a way to address some of the issues. Derry would have come to the south, or places that would have transferred north. Obviously, there was...
But the reality was that a huge number of Protestants in the north were determined to avoid being in United Ireland. They thought, with some precedence...
So to put it back in yourself then for a moment, come back to where you were a moment ago, and then you're going to go against the democratic will of the people. You say a majority of people in the north, so we could say a majority of the people in Munster wanted to have United Ireland. Why wasn't that accepted? But, you know, that's a bit of a nonsense.
Can I deal with that point?
Sorry?
That's where it gets us back to the issue of what nations are.
Yeah, nations are the people who live in the country or have come to the country. Everybody, I believe, who come here or live here or are born here can consider themselves Irish, or if they want to, consider themselves British. And I would suggest in a united Ireland that if people are born and want to remain British, that's something we can deal with, no problem whatsoever. Okay. So we need to have, and I don't keep saying the Citizens' Assembly, but it's not going to be the panacea for everything, but we need to have that to tease out questions like this, and we are going to have...
Can you see the issue? If Northern Ireland is still a deeply divided society, sectarianism seems as rife as it was in 1969 and long before. So there's a huge problem there, which no government in Northern Ireland, no executive in Northern Ireland has done much about, which is a real problem. But suppose that was dealt with, if the two societies, if North and South, were functioning properly, and why is this idea of United Ireland so important, or at all important?
I look at it from an optimistic perspective. So, I studied history in college, and whenever you think about, Irishness or nationalism, was the main pushback, whenever I talk about being Rundies and Irish, is that sense of, oh, you can't be Irish because you don't share a colonial past. So that's the one element of it, where, again, because of colonialism, Irishness was embedded with whiteness. And again, you can see that when the Irish emigrated to places like the UK and the US, they were not seen as white, again, there was those famous slogans of no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. So once the Irish identity was constructed, whiteness was there, which again makes it harder for people like myself who have a dual identity to identify as that. And for different projects I've done, even through literature, the same, in Northern Ireland, when someone is black, again, there's that straight, like that sense of identity and belonging in this hybrid community. So I think that's why I'm optimistic about it, because if we both experience that, and if we're kind of approaching this new future of a united Ireland, and again, where like the fluidity of Irishness and Britishness, that sense of identity, we understand it's not fixed and it's not one thing. Like, I'm optimistic about what that's going to mean for, I don't know, if I have kids in the future and they have a dual identity, like, are they going to have a better understanding of belonging, culture, and understanding better than I do now, because we don't have a united Ireland, and because, again, like, my blackness stops me from being viewed as Irishness because I don't share that colonial past.
Are you worried that if you have children, they might have a Carlow accent?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's okay. My boyfriend is from Limerick, so yeah,
that's
so
a Limerick
that'll
accent.
save them. So that'll save them. But yeah.
Yeah, yes.
The short answer to the question. Nearly a quarter of a century ago, nearly half the population of Northern Ireland signed up in good faith to the Good Friday Agreement. And half the population who classed themselves as Irish signed up in good faith to that agreement. Now, it's not incumbent on us as guarantors of that agreement to assure a peaceful process to that united Ireland. And is that not a simple answer to your question? Like 25 years of reconciliation, cross-border community building, and all of this going on, in good faith they signed up to that. Now 25 years later, I think it's time we start to look at the end game.
Yeah, I think the apprehension is that, first of all, as I said, Northern Ireland is a deeply divided society, and sectarianism is still very rife. And we, in a United Ireland context, I don't believe we have the capacity to deal with it or to contain it. And there's a real problem that there will be violence emerging as a consequence of that. Secondly, that even apart from the sectarian issue, the vast bulk of unionists don't want to be part of United Ireland. And a minority of those will resort to violence to prevent it happening, and if it does happen, to try to subvert it. So we could be back into a terrible conflict yet again, with lots of people dead and further division in our country, and it could be a disaster. And there's a further point, and that is, and I was just going to get to that point now, that I don't think the people down here are willing to make the kind of changes and sacrifices that are necessary, even if we could persuade the unionists to join us. And if you don't mind, I'll go through that now, because recent polls have shown that the vast majority of people down here won't pay any more taxes, that they're against changing the national anthem, which should be changed anyway. It's an awful thing. And thirdly, like the national anthem, soldiers are we whose lives are pledged for Ireland. I'm not a soldier. My life is not pledged for Ireland. I don't believe anybody's life here is pledged to Ireland. And all this stuff about Tregoni Shrek for love na Biller, it's crazy stuff. And yet we sing it largely because it's in Irish. We don't understand it. But anyway, that's one of the things we don't want to change down here is the national anthem. People don't want to change the flag even. And so where do we go?
Listen, you have to, this is where everything has to be teased out. This is why the referendum has to be fought positively. This is why we have to have a citizens' assembly and other forum like this. I'm disappointed there's not people who are not in this room who are opposed to United Ireland. At least we could hear why they're opposed to it. I disagree with what you're saying there. There's always a danger in any conflict or any change or constitutional change anywhere in the world that it could turn violent. I actually don't believe that would be the case this time in the North. And the reason I don't believe it would, if we had a referendum, a properly referendum where it was thought out, where we enthusiastically did it, where we persuaded some of the people to come with us, which I genuinely do believe some of them will come with us, and if there was a commitment from the British force, from the British state, that they would not interfere, they would not arm loyalist gangs like they've always done. They would not have their military intelligence running those gangs. If the British support was not there for violence in this country, it will not come back.
The number of people killed in Northern Ireland is the consequence of the loyalist gangs. And
your point was, and it's a point that's going to come. Point is going to have to be addressed.
The number of people killed in Northern Ireland during the course of the Troubles as a consequence of British intelligence liaising with loyalists. And there was a lot of people killed, but it's a tiny fraction of the number of people killed by the IRA. Tiny fraction.
But what I'm saying to you, Vincent, is you're talking about violence that might erupt if we were to have a border poll, and if we won the border poll.
Mars.
And you're talking about, and I would be very disappointed if we won a border poll by 50+1. That's not what I want to do. But I would accept the referendum even if we lose it, which would be unfortunate. But I genuinely believe we will win this. We will win it by being positive.
Okay.
But the elephant in the room they're talking about is a return to violence, and I actually don't. I think that can be neutralised if the British state gives the commitment that they're not going to, because you can see reference the murder of Pat Finucane, right? The person who had the gun was a British agent. The person who drove the car was a British agent. The person who fingered him was a British agent. The person who disposed of the weapon was a British agent. And you're reading stories about members of the UDA, UVF, whatever. 80% of them were British agents or working, giving information back or getting information from the British state. If that is taken away from them, where do they get the weapons from? Where do they get their, where do they get their support from?
A tiny fraction of the number of people killed in Northern Ireland were killed by those as compared with the IRA. The IRA killed almost half, and Republican groups killed 6%.
What the point of is answering the question you made.
All right. Can I just go to Carl? Would you be in favour of changing the national anthem and the flag in the context of United Ireland?
I think the flag is very inclusive as it is, and over the years it's had a different connotation in North. But that orange, I always had in my primary school classroom, the orange represents unionism, green represents nationalism, and white is peaceful.
And the answer
however,
to my question is?
that won't wash the people in the North. I don't like Ireland's call. I think the Irish rugby team is actually a fabulous example of how you can get people from 4 provinces together
and all traditions.
I'd like Morris's Citizens' Assembly maybe to take some of that decision.
And the answer to my question.
I actually love the national anthem. Yes, look, it's a very militarised. La Marseillaise is in France too. It talks about blood and the gutters and all that. Our own national anthem does too. It probably would not wash if we had a referendum. And that's something I'd really have to move outside my comfort zone for. I don't want to suggest
Would you be in favour of changing the national anthem and changing the flag in the context of United Ireland?
If it got United Ireland, yes.
Right. Why didn't you say that at the beginning? You said, Jesus Christ. What? God, Christ almighty. No. Too much already.
Could I mention I want to mention
No. Would you be in favour of changing the flag and changing the national anthem?
This is coming from somebody who has made sacrifices year on year to achieve the position and the life that I have in Ireland, and I believe in being open to change. I believe in being I believe in being adaptable. So if it came to a discussion, I would have the discussion, and if that was the decider, I would be willing to consider that.
He's going to report you to the Fianna Fáil Politburo tomorrow, and you'll be expelled. Rowan.
Well, Vincent, with one sentence, don't worry. If that was the final status price tag, with great reluctance, I'd have to accept it.
But a lot of else would have to be agreed to.
Oh, indeed.
We'd still be able to sing it another forward. It mightn't be.
Please not. Morris.
Yeah.
Morris, you more or less said yes. That you'd be in favour of making whatever changes are required.
I thought you got soft.
What?
I don't think I ever said that. No, Vincent.
Well,
what I'm suggesting is we have a conversation and we have a debate and we talk.
But it wouldn't be a break.
There's going to be things that Carl will have different views to me on certain things, and we'll all have different views of what New Ireland's going to be, what it's going to be. People in the north will have different versions of it, and all the symbols we have. National anthem, I think, is fine at the moment, but obviously it'll change. Like, look at the American national anthem, talks about bombing people.
So why shouldn't we be in favour of bombing people?
I'm not saying that. What I'm actually saying is all of the stuff will be up for discussion in the New Ireland.
What do you think?
If it can deliver a better Ireland.
Do you sing the national anthem in Irish, by the way? Do you?
No, only in primary school, but I've forgotten it.
Does it matter to you whether the present national anthem remains or not?
Yeah, because it's part of our identity. So
Pardon?
I say it's part of our identity. So like whether or not I've been born in Ireland, it's something that I resonate with. And like again with the flag, it's something that I'm very proud when I say I'm Burundi's and Irish. So yeah, like the national anthem and the flag. But again, like I agree with everyone. It's if people vote for it, like I don't really hold like much symbolism to it, but it's something that I'm proud of. But if it's majority rules to change it, I'm not into politics, so I'm not a politician.
Okay, anybody want to involve in the discussion here? I just want to check if there's anybody who hasn't already spoken want to get involved in the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about elephants in the room. The one elephant in the room is the future of the British state. Like if Scotland gets independence, it fundamentally changes the configuration of what is known today as the United Kingdom. And so the question then, and that's a possibility, it's a real possibility. I'm not saying it's an inevitability, but it's a real possibility. And then the question arises, like, to what entity is are the unionist community in the north of Ireland actually loyal to? Because in actual fact, at that stage, if the United Kingdom is beginning to reconfigure in a very radical way, then I think a lot of the unions will then look and see what's the option. The option is to negotiate a united Ireland or to try and go for an independent North, which would be the biggest disaster of all, I think. So I think that's something a factor that needs at all times to be kept there in the background, because I think that if there was a second referendum in Scotland and it was lost, then Britain would be much less committed to retaining the link with the North, because I think at the moment the link with the North is bound up with this idea of maintaining the integrity of the United Kingdom as it stands, and basically they can't really kind of loosen the link with the North because that gives gives a completely wrong message to those within Scotland who might be thinking of independence. So I think that's a factor that needs to be
Okay. Anybody else want to talk? Yes? Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'd just like to say that I wouldn't be for changing the national anthem or the flag, and at the end of the day it is majority rules, but that's my history and our culture. Like it's very important that we are classified as warriors. We did fight for our independence, we're still fighting for it, and that's the whole point. And a united Ireland has to include, like everybody said, Morris, in the Citizen Assembly. It's very important. Diversity, social inclusion, communities are just falling apart, really. But the biggest problem I feel is that environmentally, if we took the same action that we take for COVID as seriously as we did for the environment, I mean globally, but even from Ireland's point of view, I mean, we can all see, like, we're living in rivers, in the River Shannon just beside us, and it's fine, like every year they complain about the exact same things, but what do they do to put up carbon tax? I mean, that's crucifying people on the ground. That's not actually solving any solution. So I think, like Mara said, if we had a citizen assembly and look at our services and we all know what's wrong, we all know the solutions. That's not rocket science, but at the end of the day we just have to put these.
You made the point that it's majority rule and that's it. That's the point you made, wasn't it?
Well, I mean, like, going from our own culture, I mean, none of us would want to change the flag. That's who we all are.
But if we're determined to have majority rule, we're hardly going to forsake that to accommodate people who don't agree with us.
Well, look, if people want to identify themselves as being British and they want to keep their own side of the flag, but they're living in Republic of Ireland, and Ireland, like, this is our country. It's not the British country that owns the 6 counties. That's not... Look, we signed an agreement at the end of the day, but that was to save more lives than lose more lives, and now is the time that we actually take it back. Like, the British have taken over, colonised lots of places, and
Okay.
we're not giving up.
Okay. Anybody else want to make the point? Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I suppose the flag does come into this a little bit, but I am just wondering about sectarianism and poverty and how they're related in the north and in the south. And when you have nothing else to hang on to, I'm wondering then, is that where all the symbolism comes from? And maybe I'm naive. I just think that is it a thing that it was political? The partition was political, and it suited England to have that, or the UK to have that partition. But I just would go back to the fact that, is it poverty that has fed that sectarianism? And if you went up to the north, or if you went anywhere in the world, is it in the most deprived areas that you would see the flags flying the highest, and the most symbolism and the most violence? And I do think that we have to look at that as well if we are examining the question of United Ireland and symbols around it.
Okay. One of the disappointments of the Good Friday Agreement succeeded in stopping violence, and it created political structures for the two communities to share what's called power together. But and that's a significant advance in what the situation was before. But society there has remained largely the same, largely as divided as it was previously. And no initiatives have been taken to do anything about it. And there's one obvious initiative that might have been taken and hasn't been taken, that is to push forward with integrated education. And Maurice, are you concerned about that?
Well, I'm concerned about integration of schools, of the fact that we haven't done it. I'm concerned about schools being, in this state, at present, being majority run by Catholic or different or religious organisations. I think our schools should be secular. I think they should be open to everybody, and I would see that in United Ireland. But if people want to have their own schools, that's fine, but don't expect the state to necessarily fund it to the degree that they would do now. I think there has to be control over the schools by the actual state.
But dealing with Northern Ireland situation, isn't...
I said I was disappointed there hasn't been more progress towards integrated education. I think that has been a failure. But the Good Friday Agreement, it did end in the conflict we had in the north. We have big problems with it. The Assembly has never, or the Stormont has never really worked for the benefit of people in the way we would have hoped it would. Power sharing hasn't been the dream that we thought it might be, and you see the way the DUP walked away from it a couple of weeks ago, using the excuse of the protocol. The protocol is not a problem; it's an excuse they're using because there's an election coming up, and that's what that's all about, is to get them off of the hook of the poor polling the DUP is having. But as I say, if we're
Martin McGuinness, when he was Minister of Education,
was a very good education minister.
Yes, and he tried to do something about
He did.
education, but he was stopped. By whom? The Catholic bishops.
Yeah, well, there you have it. So that's what I'm saying. You need to take. You
have to take these on.
For instance, we ended up, as I said, with partition being a disaster. We ended up with an orange state, which was, certain kids went to one school, certain kids went to the other school, and we have the outcome of that. I would like to see integrated schools, but I would like to see in the New Ireland schools that would be secular.
Anybody else want to talk about that issue?
If I can, I was a primary school teacher before the Dáil. It's absolutely essential.
God, you're a primary school teacher?
Yeah.
Jesus, go on.
Hopefully I won't be back there.
Go on.
I met with Stephen Travers yesterday. He's one of the survivors of the Miami Showband massacre. And he goes around to schools and he talks to children he talks to 11 and 12-year-olds about his experiences that night, but the journey he's been on for the last 30 years in his mind and in his community, trying to get beyond that, and reconciliation, a term he doesn't really like actually. But he said it's a struggle. Every time he wants to speak in a school, the school have to go and get permission. They have to get a grant from the arts office. They host an event. They get all these kind of things in the room. But there is no programme, and there's an even worse programme of education than in England, Scotland and Wales, where they know nothing about our history. So we've all these young people growing up. And actually, I'm very hopeful about the future. They're growing up not knowing very little about the past. But I think when the DUP face the electorate on the 5th of May, not everyone is going to look at that election through unionism and nationalism lenses. People will give them a kicking, I believe, in the ballot box because of the position they've had on climate change, marriage equality. Those 1.3 million people who were born after the Good Friday Agreement. We've seen a kind of a political revolution in Ireland when it came to the 8th Amendment, marriage equality. There's a movement of young people. They're not in Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin or Labour. They're independent thinking young people. They also exist in the north. They exist in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. They will be out very strongly this election. And I don't believe they're going to wash with the argument of Edwin Poots and others who live in a dinosaur age, forgetting their traditions, forgetting all of that for one moment, they will not wash with this 21st century dinosaur politics that they've been practicing for the last number of years. That won't wash for them. Maybe there's another brand of unionism, or maybe there's room for a new political movement in the north. But
do you think the DUP will get the kind of kicking that Fianna Fáil got? We're the largest
party in the Dáil.
What?
We're the largest party in the Dáil. We're the largest party in local government. No, we didn't get a kicking. We're certainly...
You had... What? What? You didn't get a kicking? Do you remember? There was a little...
You began by asking me what do you think of 50% plus 1 and 49% plus 2 and all that. The reality is the makeup of the Dáil at the moment, Mary Lou might like to tell people for 3 weeks after the election that she's a victim of the electoral process. The reality is the most seats in Dáil Éireann currently, and the fortune wheel may turn. The fortune wheel may turn, and more luck to whoever's next government. I hope I'll be there. But I can tell you the largest party numerically, and it's a fact, is Fianna Fáil, and that is a fact. And actually,
I wouldn't have one vote, and that was because you had a Catherine. That's the only reason you had the largest party.
Okay, well,
you had a safe seat.
Yeah, well, look, have you political party membership? Oh, good. Okay. Well, we all have, and we're here to respect it. But what I see tonight...
I don't have. But...
You don't?
No.
I probably have a farm here in the folder. I think on a night like tonight, of course, we can have another night here, maybe talking about housing and all those other issues. But I think people here tonight want to talk about United Ireland. And the reality is, we spoke about duplicity here. There's huge duplicity in this island. It would make huge economic sense. Forgetting about your flags, it would make huge economic sense for this island to trade as one, to transact as one, to be as one.
There's no reason why that shouldn't happen in the context of two jurisdictions. No, not at all.
Yeah, but that fundamentally changed with the Brexit result as well.
Well, I agree that Brexit is...
Yeah, and what we have at the moment is the protocol, which is designed to protect the economies, both north and south, right? But there has been a fundamental change, and I genuinely believe there's more people in the north will vote for United Ireland because they want to remain European citizens. And that's going to be a key thing of the referendum. But Cathal is right there as well. We have duplication of services. But we're moving on from that already. Business has moved on faster than everybody else. We have healthcare where people in Donegal, I think the health group, the HSE group there say that 50 to 60 people a year are saving their lives by cross-border cardiac care. 7,000 people a year are crossing the border for cross-border treatment since 2012. Thousands of people are doing that already. How many people cross the border every day to work north?
And why do you think people in the Northern Ireland would vote for a state, would vote to join a state that has failed to provide such services?
I'm not asking anybody to join a state. I said that in my speech, and a little bit of the speech I had to say. I said we can't go back to 26 plus 6. We have to look at a new vision of Ireland, and talk about how we can build the services we want. So if you have a child waiting to see a child psychologist, you don't wait for a year. You don't sit in the hospital bed out in Dordile, as I said, 1,200 people already in the month of February out there. We build a national health service, we build a proper school service, and I believe the economic benefits of United Ireland will fund that for us.
Right, I've just one final thought in my head about all this, and it is this. Would it be a good idea for us to await pursuing a united Ireland until such time as there is a united Northern Ireland? In other words, that we've dealt with the problem, that they've dealt with the problem of sectarianism.
So I don't understand your question. Are you saying that we abandon the aspirations of nationalists and Republican people?
Await.
For what? For what majority? What are you waiting for?
Await that.
How would you count that? How would you say you have your majority? Would it be a poll? Would it be an opinion poll? Would it
No, I think you misunderstand my question.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting that, I'm asking the question, would it be a good idea for us to defer this issue of a united Ireland until such time as we deal with the dysfunctionality that persists in Northern Ireland in terms of sectarianism, etc.?
Okay, well, we gave them 100 years already. They've had 100 years of their state and it's failed. So I think the time is ready for us to get ready and start preparing for a border poll, do the Citizens' Assembly or versions of it, have meetings like this, reach out to the Ulster unionist population, whatever you want to call them, Protestant loyalists, unionist population, reach out to them and get as many of those. I want to win this referendum. I would be very disappointed if we won it by 50+1. Very disappointed.
When do you think it should happen? Just out of interest.
Well, I think we should have a citizen assembly first, Colin, and I think we could tease out those questions. But the sooner the better. The Jerry Adams famously said he'd like to have it yesterday, you know, and I think there's a sense of we want to have it as soon as we can. I don't want to have it if we think we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
Not think we're going to lose it, but I genuinely believe we can sit down and...
Okay, there's one further idea, actually.
Sorry,
go ahead, yeah.
It's an important point. There's a lot of younger people in the North who were born after the Good Friday Agreement, as Colin said there, you know, and I genuinely believe most of them are progressive and they don't want to live in a dinosaur state where they are, where, you know, we have to legislate for women's reproductive rights in London. We have to legislate for marriage equality in London because the veto you have in the state you have. We've given them 100 years to prove themselves. They haven't proved. It's a failed state and we need to move on to, I believe, to a united Ireland which will be better for everyone.
Okay. There is a further issue actually I just want to raise. And it's this. There is a prospect that in the next few years there will be a Sinn Féin-led government in the south and the First Minister in Northern Ireland will also be for Sinn Féin. Is that likely to turn off people in Northern Ireland from the idea of a united Ireland because of what Sinn Féin cheerlead for during the course of the Troubles? And still, up to now, a few days ago even, it celebrated or commemorated the deaths of 3 IRA people who were attempting to kill a lot of RUC people.
Do you think, I think, look, if you're going to go on, Irish Republicans will never stop commemorating people who died in the struggle for Irish freedom. That's never going to happen. So, but I genuinely think you're moving into a situation where you're potentially going to have, after the next election, I believe there'll be a Sinn Féin either majority government in the south or a Sinn Féin-led government in the south, with the potential of having a Sinn Féin First Minister if we can get this, and this is a big if Stormont can be re-established after the election comes on the 5th of May. We're moving into a very difficult situation where the DUP have collapsed the Assembly and the Stormont because of their own election ambitions. It might be difficult to get that back.
Okay, Carl, do you think Sinn Féin is a barrier to a united Ireland, given the fact that they cheerled the slaughter of so many people in Northern Ireland over so many years?
They're a major political party here in the 26 counties and Northern Ireland. They have to be respected as such. I say that in records. They have to, every political party, every individual elected to Dáil Éireann, whether independent or politically aligned, has to be respected. It's when we drill down and look what they stand for. I suppose there's 2 issues I would see having difficulty with Sinn Féin. One would be some of the things, the legacy stuff they still haven't addressed. Kangaroo courts, Columba McVeigh, that disappeared. All of these issues still need to be dealt with. And I respectfully ask them to deal with it because if they have the will, if they have a will for United Ireland, like all of us have, that journey has to be gone on. We have to go on a political journey to win Fianna Fáil unions. Everyone has to go on a political journey. The other thing I would have some difficulty would be the economic policies. We speak about the all-Ireland economy. That is crucial. This isn't all flags. This is about an economic argument as well. The economic policies could also be equally off-putting to industry, and that's something I would fear. We haven't mentioned once tonight the shared island unit. That has been a huge thing in the past 18 months. There's now money being spent on projects like the Narrow-Water Bridge, the Ulster Canal, projects linking across the border, because if we're going to talk about a united Ireland, we have to start with things like education, initiatives like that. The referendum, the border poll will be the very last thing to happen. It's the structures happen between now and then. I fully support, and I'm glad what Maurice said, because I really want a border poll. I don't want to be prescriptive on the time. I want a border poll when we get the result. I do not want a Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond. Up we go with the border poll, get the wrong result. And for a generation we're beaten then. This I too wanted in my lifetime. It will not happen in our lifetime. If it's beaten, you won't get a second crack at it for another 50 or 60 years. We'll all be in the grave by then.
Anybody else want to...
And I wanted to mention Home Rule earlier, if I can. No, I believe...
You would like to tell us more about your background, would you?
Yeah.
You left out a few things.
Yeah,
you left out a few things.
Yeah, I had family in the home rulers. No, I want. This is an important. The history of this is very important.
The history of what?
The radicalism of 1916 was absolutely right. It set the tone for where we went in the decade afterwards, and it still sets the tone of where our country's going. However, and maybe Rowan has a position on this, perhaps We were on the cusp of home rule. It's just a what if. The historian in me often wonders about this. Perhaps if we had achieved home rule, there would have been a nation we would have not liked for a few years, but possibly we would have avoided this visceral nationalism, unionism partition that happened for a long time. We would probably be already united, but we'd have gone on a very different nation journey than we've gone in the past century. I don't know.
Ron, do you want to comment on that?
You're the historian. Go on.
Well, even with the benefit of hindsight, I don't think anyone can really answer that. It's an interesting question. These are questions that should be asked in case we could learn something from them for the present. But one must remember, it was the third Home Rule Bill and not the War of Independence that created the unionist monolith for the first time ever. And there hadn't been anything like that beforehand. There have been expressions of appropriate loyalty, certainly, but from Irishmen supporting the empire. I mean, we were in the empire, integrated into the Kingdom from 1st of January 1801. And it took 70, 80 years before unionists began to get worried about the demographic situation, just as they're probably going to be very worried next summer when they're looking at a precipitous fall due to virtually every major indication of population change being negative for them. And I think we should be mindful of that when we're dealing with them, particularly as they're transitioning from being a supremacist culture, political culture, into a minority one. It's going to be very traumatic for them. And I think we do need to tread carefully in that regard.
If I can just go back to one of your questions where you asked why can't we defer it for a couple of years. I think this is an opportune time to have these conversations, to I suppose, to envision a shared island, because we're coming out of COVID, the pandemic has turned the world on its head. We are having conversations on the suitability of our education system. We're looking at how the healthcare system was not, I suppose, was not fit to deal with the crisis in some situations. We saw what happened with the nursing homes. COVID raised a lot of areas in our system where change needs to happen. So this is the right time to have the conversations as we're trying to rebuild, as we're trying to form a new system, a new community and a new nation. It is the right time to have these conversations to see, can we, incorporate all of these changes and emerge with a new, better shared island going forward into the future. So absolutely, I think this is the right time. And I do agree that we should have a citizens' assembly to deal with these questions of the flag, of the anthem. Absolutely, everybody would want to retain as much as they can of their identity. However, if we're having these conversations, we're interested in having a shared island, we have to be ready to have negotiations, to make sacrifices, to take some and leave some, so that everybody has a sense of belonging in that structure.
There's a citizenship.
I was just thinking about what you were saying in regards to what's off-putting about it, and I definitely agree with that point, because I think in order to kind of approach a united Ireland, we still have to look at like fundamental issues in Ireland. And again, I keep going back to the whole sense of identity, and with what you were saying with COVID did highlight that. So with COVID we had BLM, where again it showed how still in Ireland, like there's no definition of Irishness, and again we can't really have a united Ireland without, again, accepting that people can have a dual identity and stuff like that. And I think even with what you were talking about in education, we have seen changes, because I know like in university level, like there's talks about decolonizing the curriculum. So again, it's moving away from viewing Irish history or just history in general from like a Western white perspective, and opening it up to like a much further world perspective. Because like I know that because I'm teaching British literature, and again it's like that sense of Irishness and Britishness being merged into one, and students not really willing to even understand how the two kind of correlate. So through education system, definitely, because I remember coming into Ireland, you have to be with one of the Catholic schools, like you have to be baptized to go into that school. So again, if you're not, so things like that. But I definitely think approaching like a new vision of Ireland is we do have to address like the issue of the Irish identity, and again understanding how it's fluid and ever changing. It's going to be changing the whole time, and only.
Why does identity matter?
Because it offers a sense of belonging. So I mean it in the sense of only in Ireland is my identity question. So like if I go to the UK, anywhere like that, and if I say Burundi's and Irish, no one bats, no one does anything at all. But in Ireland, it's where you actually from, because again, there's this sense of you can't be another and Irish. So I think until we address that, because with Celtic Tiger, we've seen migrants coming into Ireland, and there's different generations of migrants that are born here. So again, how can we approach a future where even their sense of belonging is constantly questioned? And again, if you're bringing in people from Northern Ireland who also face that, how are we going to address that?
Okay. All right, I think that's it. Is that all right? Have we talked enough, or will we let Carl have another hour? Will we?
You have to stand your corner when the wings are being clipped. You know?
Okay, thank you very much.
Tony's going to ask a question.
Okay, sorry. Tony, go ahead, yeah.
Well, thanks, and thanks for the host for hosting this.
Oh, sorry, yes. Start again.
Well, first of all, thank you to the host for hosting this. I think it's been a very good event. But I'm curious, Maris touched on the outworkings of Brexit and the failures to prepare for what happens when the Brexit referendum passed. And Cathal, or Deputy Crowe, pardon me, touched on the failure of the Scottish nationalists to be ready for the referendum that they had. You could argue they put too much into their literature when it came to that referendum. So I'm curious, what's holding this state back from holding the Citizens' Assembly? Why is it on organisations like Ireland's Future to move this debate forward when we have a possibility of a Citizens' Assembly and a democratically elected mayor of Dublin, and it's over 1,000 days since the Limerick people voted for a democratically elected mayor, and we don't even have the legislation? So why is it so far down the agenda in terms of Citizens' Assemblies that we're proposing? I'm quite curious on that.
I'd love to answer if Vince will let me.
I think, was it not Morris you were asking?
I think he was asking all of us, wasn't he? Look,
he works for Morris, so you can ask that question.
Yeah. Went to college.
You're Sinn Féin, are you?
I am.
Why? Doesn't matter, man. Go on. Sorry, start over there. What do you think is...
What?
Would you like to answer that question?
I wouldn't really know much about it, so
Sandrine
I'll
or
pass it
myself?
on. Yeah.
What?
Who
You
are
go
you
ahead
asking?
then. What?
Who are you
I'm
asking?
addressing I suppose, Deputy Crowe as
I'm just waiting for permission to answer, Tony.
Jesus, why are you asking him? Go on.
He's a government TV. It's government policy.
Oh, God, go on.
Vincent, keep up.
Yeah, I was in. Tony can ask this question to Morris every day. I think he works for. I happen to be in college with Tony. He's a very good shinner. He's one. There's. We won't talk about the collectives, but he's a very good guy. Look, jokes and lightheartedness aside, I've looked at the percentages, Tony. I'm as passionate about getting to that point as much as you. If you look at the last census, people talk about Catholic population in the north quite a lot, but 100,000 of the Catholics counted in the last census. And forgive me, because this harps back to this whole thing about what is Irish. So forgive me for this, but 100,000 of them were ethnically Polish, Lithuanian, Latvian. So arithmetically, you cannot just count and assume that you're getting to a population threshold, you're getting to a percentage point, hold the referendum and win it, because that doesn't necessarily happen.
Yes,
Citizens' Assembly.
Is your government resisting a Citizens' Assembly?
It's a simple question, yes?
No problem, I'll answer the three Sinn Féin lads.
Oh, no, three, you're going to ask the three.
There is. I don't know were you watching the announcements today from government, but there is the Shared Ireland unit. There are 9 dialogue teams. The most recent one launched this afternoon was the theme of sports. They're looking at economics and all different strata of how Irish people define themselves, the sectoral interests of our country going forward, the sporting one. And maybe this is the good point to end on, because I did mention the Irish rugby team. They will take to the pitch on Saturday. I love the fact that over the years, the likes of...
Sunday, actually.
Sunday. I love the fact that over the years, the likes of Simon Zebo, the likes of Trimble, who will worship in his Presbyterian church, but gladly line up on the team that Sunday. I love the fact that it's been all-inclusive. That's the next team. So we can talk about a Citizens' Assembly. Dáil Éireann is the ultimate Citizens' Assembly, elected by the people. I've no issue, I've no problem with the Citizens' Assembly, but let's not pretend there's nothing happening. There are 9 dialogue teams. Anyone in this room can participate in those. There is no blockade on citizens' views. That is the job. That's why I'm out here tonight. I actually volunteered to partake in this tonight. I didn't have to be asked. We are forthright. I will be at every street corner. I will gladly attend a Sinn Féin meeting if they invite me. I will go to a unionist meeting because I am passionate about this, but it has to happen in the right way, Tony.
Okay, thank you very much, and that's the end of it. Thank you.